Oh, we're starting? Are we rolling? We're rolling. Cool, let's go. Wandavision is the newest entry in the MCU and it does a lot of things right. My god, does it do a lot of things right. But it's also flawed in a way that's completely understandable but also somewhat unforgivable. An incredible, groundbreaking but ultimately disappointing show that I haven't really been able to stop thinking about since I first watched it. Even though my brain has made it fluff. It's so Marvel and yet so not. And it had set itself up to wonderfully evolve a franchise of which, if we're being truthful, needs somewhat of an overhaul to remain interesting to its fans. And because of that, I think it's important to look at Wandavision in relation to the rest of the MCU, to really determine what it does well, what it doesn't do so well, and what this might mean for the future of the MCU as it enters Phase 4. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I get into that, hi, my name is Salad. Why my name's Salad? I don't know. Probably because I'm green. Get it? Because I'm a greenhorn. Because this is my first video. Also, I know I'm purple, but you get what I mean. Just roll the intro, man. When I first watched WandaVision, I really didn't like it all that much. Like, I watched the first 2 episodes and just kind of switched off. I saw the little hints and that they tucked into the episodes, but they weren't really enough to keep me interested at first, so I just kind of dropped it. But my friends wouldn't shut the fuck up about it. Every day in the group chat with the wows and the nah I'm shooks. I basically got peer pressured into watching the entire thing again. Turns out though, in this case, I love peer pressure because bro. From episode 3, I binge watched the entire thing. Luckily, the day that I caved was the day that the last episode came out, so I didn't have to do the whole week by week thing, which, by the way, Disney, you can f**k right off with all that shit. It's actually the 21st century now. There's no reason not to drop an entire season at once, just because you're mad at Netflix for getting the jump on you in the streaming world and making a better Daredevil show than you ever could because of your borderline sexual attraction to a PG-13 rating. So now you want to rope customers in slowly by building hype, but if I'm being honest, I can recognize that it's a pretty certified marketing tactic, but that doesn't mean it's not annoying and I'm not happy about it. Anyway, I watched the whole thing and ultimately came away disappointed, but not before some really incredible happened, because that build up to slowly unraveling the core of the story. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself again. For those of you who haven't seen WandaVision, although you're about to have it spoiled the shit out of for you if you're here right now, it's about a character named Wanda who, in her grief, used her extraordinary powers to create a real-life sitcom which she lives in an attempt to escape the harsh realities of her life and live in fictional bliss. But as you can imagine, escaping reality is never that simple. Okay, back to it, because that build up to slowly unraveling the core of the story was amazing. Like the weird bee guy who turned out to be an agent trying to infiltrate from underground, or the helicopter that was in colour whilst everything else was black and white. In fact, I now really appreciate the 2 episodes that I found boring at first because of how well they complemented the later episodes, even if the 60s sitcom humour did grate at me a little bit. I gotta give Disney some props for taking that risk though, because I'm sure that they knew that people like me wouldn't vibe with it at first, but internet chatter, peer pressuring and habitual boundary stepping stuffed toy friends would push the non-believers over the edge and back to the show, which only adds to their list of incredible marketing tackers for Disney+. It was so unexpectedly innovative. It had me looking up the directors mid-episode for most of the show, which is something I never do because I don't even know what to do with that information. Unless of course it's Martin Scorsese or something, but you know, it wasn't. What can I say though? Right now, it's shout out Matt Shackman. I probably won't know if you direct anything else, but this time though, I got you. It's the big homie. Anyway, for 7 episodes, I was completely on the edge of my seat with the Modern Family and the Malcolm in the Middle references, the incredible supporting cast, and how the whole series began to tie into the rest of the MCU, all of it. Monica Rambeau was awesome, Jimmy Woo was the fucking homie he always has been, and Darcy is the perfect character to complement them both. I particularly liked and have liked Darcy though. I tend to like snarky characters, can't imagine why. And then of course we have Wanda and Vision, who were always kind of to me in the MCU, but now their characters have been so far fleshed out that it impacted me directly. So directly impacted by their fleshing out, in fact, I might think I was a real fucking monkey. There were so many scenes of their interaction that I loved, but my favourite has to be when Wanda and Vision were arguing in the kitchen, and Vision was saying that he knew that she had done something terrible to the people of the town, but Wanda was lying about it and tried to roll the credits of her show in front of the viewer, which, by the way, is an incredible way to add to the weird midpoint that the show created between breaking the fourth wall and not for the viewer who's watching the show. That's actually also a show within the show. Oh my god, I love it. But she knows that if she somehow gets rid of her whole trauma-induced magical sphere thing, that Vision will die. And she also knows that if he finds out what she's done, he'll make her get rid of the realm and she can't take it. I swear I almost teared up during that scene, it was so emotional. I've never teared up during a Marvel film before, even when Iron Man died, and I love that guy. R.I.P. Pour out liquor for the Hobie. Wandavision is a show that was a collection of new and fresh ideas in a series that had been using the same formula since the homie Iron Man had his debut, and we're still pouring out the liquor. And then, of course, the last 2 episodes happened, and Agatha Harkness revealed herself, and it turned into a generic Marvel film all over again.
To me? Why?
This show had spent 7 straight episodes proving that it was anything but your usual superhero fare. It was a show about emotional walls, grief, and the effects of extreme trauma on a person, which was incredible because flawed character writing is something that Marvel excels at, which is what sets them apart from their boy contemporaries over at DC, who have only really managed to humanize Batman in the Dark Knight series, but he's literally a human, so it's kind of cheating.
Where are we?
All of Marvel's characters are really, really human before the powers, and Wanda was absolutely no exception. She was the protagonist and the antagonist in this series. A woman who didn't want to harm anyone but lashed out in a way that she couldn't control and ended up hurting the people around her. What's more human than that? Almost everyone has gone through an experience like that or experienced it from someone close to them, and that's what makes her so relatable at the core. To paraphrase something that Monica says to Wanda towards the end of the series,
given the chance and given your power, I'd bring my mom back. I know I would.
and yes, you might be thinking, oh, but you're a purple monkey. What do I know about being human? And to that I would reply that monkeys are better stock pickers than humans according to your science, so we're already more advanced than you in some areas. Plus, apparently, human DNA is 96% similar to monkeys, and if that's the case, I'd say we have the better 4%. Besides, I live with a human. He moves my arms and sometimes because I have polio or something. Anyway, I also trained him to operate the cameras and edit and shit, so I don't have to, which is the least he could do considering all he does is fart in his sleep and steal my bananas, the high maintenance piece of shit. I don't even fucking like him. Hey man, that's not a very nice... Shut the up. Anyway, Wanda was awesome and was portrayed so well, but they completely threw out the impact of her character arc at the end by having Agatha turn out to be the real villain. Something that I assume that they did so that Wanda wouldn't be seen in too negative of a light by the end of the series. I also imagine this is because Wanda's cast to be in the new Doctor Strange movie coming out next year, and they want people to buy tickets to watch it. Which to me says that Marvel doesn't trust their audience to understand that characters can be flawed. Not really, anyway. They trust you to believe that Tony Stark always means well even when he's being a bit of a or that Spider-Man always means well even when he does some reckless shit, because both of their MOs are always explicitly to save people. But if a character doesn't have the usual cookie-cutter Marvel motivations, they tend to try and find a way to brute force the viewer's perceptions of the character. Like, in The Incredible Hulk in Phase 1, they had a cookie-cutter villain, Abomination, who was in the comics, but they pretty much slapped him into the story to prevent Banner from coming across as not heroic enough in the film, because the whole film was about the government trying to apprehend Banner because they viewed him as too dangerous. And even Captain America Civil War had Zemo slapped into it so that there could be a bad guy for the sake of it, instead of Bucky being the villain, even though he would have been committing the crimes under the control of Hydra. In both cases, I would think that those situations would make their characters redeemable morally, but it seems that Marvel doesn't quite agree with me here, and that's a shame in my opinion. Storylines like this to me indicate that Marvel doesn't trust us to understand that just because you've made mistakes, even horrendous ones like Wanda, doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad person. Causing pain to those around you, intentionally or not, doesn't mean that you're simply a villain. Sure, there have been storylines which involve Loki fighting on the side of the heroes, or even Zemo becoming relevant again in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But it seems that almost every time Marvel has the chance to really explore something a bit more nuanced than good guy and bad guy in their films, or a clear transition between one or the other, they glaze over that nuance instead of really fleshing it out. Now, I understand that by ending a series or a film with one of these usual villains, Marvel prevents their more experimental stories from being seen as too dark, but I'd argue that it's pretty hard to effectively explore humanity in writing without having to go to some dark places sometimes. The proof of that can be seen by watching WandaVision itself. Again, the whole show is about dealing with extreme grief and trauma. A lot of times, some of the most harmful people are going through issues of their own, and it's okay for them to make mistakes on the path to understanding what they would consider to be the right thing to do. I mean, on a smaller scale anyway, because brainwashing a town and ruining a bunch of lives in the process is a pretty terrible thing, but you get what I mean. Most people don't have superpowers like hers and accidentally hurt people, and I think that's the lesson for the viewer that I think really should have been driven home. Wanda's mistake was really bad because of how powerful she is, but it was true to her character, and allowing that character to grow in a way that allows for full acknowledgement of her mistakes that she made and the severity of them is so much more powerful of a resolution than simply making the character look and feel heroic at the end. As humans, we all feel pain, and not all of us know how to deal with that pain effectively, so sometimes what a person really needs is support from the people around them so that they can get back on their feet, like Monica was trying to provide, or Betty Ross was trying to provide in The Hulk. You've got to let people be flawed for a bit so that they can get better. Their flaws aren't just washed over because you point the finger at somebody else, of whom, in the case of WandaVision, is a new villain to try and lessen the effects of the protagonist's actions. I want to emphasize lesson here. Obviously they didn't dismiss them by the end of the show, but truthfully, they should have allowed the full weight of them to hit the viewer for the real impact of what Wanda did. Funnily enough, I'd also say that there's an argument to be made that by Wanda figuring out the pain that she was causing the townspeople and then still opting to put Agatha Harkness in that space indefinitely, makes her actually kind of a bad person now? Considering that what Agatha wanted wasn't necessarily even to kill Wanda, but to discover her power and take it for herself. Putting her into an indefinite brainwashing after seeing the people in the town cry and beg for their freedom because of how harmful it was to their psyche, it's kind of a big move. In my opinion, by trying to make Wanda appear as the traditional hero at the end, they had her take a genuinely villainous action instead of the moral high ground, as 99% of the Avengers' actions had been in the past. Using it on a bad guy isn't using it for good now. It's still a horrible thing to do to someone, especially as there were quite a few less horrendous ways to deal with them in the MCU. But this does fall to the category of good guy defeating the bad guy, which I guess is simpler and easier to understand, but it completely misses the thematic mark. There's only one time in the current MCU that Marvel has really allowed this level of nuanced character, but it was under a very specific circumstance, and I'll get to that a bit later in this video. With all of that said, I think I get why they did this. I also have to bear in mind that children will watch WandaVision too, and it may be hard for deep-set themes and much darker ideas like the ones on display to be digested properly by a child, which is why they have slapped a textbook villain on the end of the show and have done in their previous films. But my response to that would be not to set up the story like this. I would rather not have WandaVision in its current form than to drop the ball on something that had the potential to be so great. Do something simpler like you've done in the past. Wanda's alone after Vision dies, she gets stalked by a witch and has to figure it out and fight her end film/series. None of the grief and trauma stuff that made her character so rich and nuanced, keep it simple. That's fine too, you've done it in the past and it worked wonders there. Let us simply add it to the MCU and move on, saving the really good ideas for somewhere where they have the ability to shine. In fact, WandaVision could have been the perfect opportunity to start a more adult section of the MCU. Disney could have locked it away behind their Stars platform on Disney Plus, along with the continuation of Jessica Jones and Daredevil, although I understand why they didn't because of the aforementioned young audience, but please Marvel, I am begging you. As I've mentioned a couple times before briefly in the video about some of the other films, this isn't an issue that I've only found within WandaVision. So to really drive home how persistent of an issue I think this is with the villains in the MCU, I've taken the liberty of rewatching every film in phases 1 to 3 to drive this point home, and I'm about to run through all of them briefly here, with the previous ideas mentioned in mind. I'm going to rate each film under 3 different categories. Number 1. Do you need to watch the film to understand the overarching story of the Infinity Saga in the MCU? This could be used to help define the film's importance. I mean, A film doesn't have to be important for it to be good or worth watching, but if it's unimportant and generic, you can rest assured that I absolutely think that Marvel dropped the ball on this one. Number 2, how generic is the villain? E.g., are they just a bad guy for the sake of it? This will be in a 4-point system which I invented. A point is awarded for good personal motivation for their actions. Another point is awarded for relevance to the MCU meta-narrative. Another point is awarded for their overall charisma in the film, and another point is awarded for their relevance to the story of the actual film itself. E.g., are they actually needed to explore the themes of the story effectively? The goal is to get all 4 points, because having 0 points would make you pointless. Get it? Ha! The final category is number 3, an overall score from the film. At the end, we'll compare the films overall and see whether MCU was most effective or not, and my take a little. Oh, and side note, I'm not including all of the after credit scenes in the meta category because that would just get messy. Truthfully, I think you should watch them all anyway, even if you don't watch a certain Marvel film. They're almost always designed to be important to the meta. Without further ado, we'll call this section Salad hasn't slept for a week watching all the Marvel films and now he's going to ramble about them in a coffee-induced stupor. Okay, go. Iron Man. I love Tony Stark's character. Like, love it. Great intro to the whole MCU. Happy and Pepper, great as well. The guy trying to oppose and kick Stark out of $1 billion company for being a wreckhead. Semi-plausible, I'll take it. Until he got into that big typical evil villain suit at the end for some shoehorn fighting, fuck's sake. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? Just about scrapes a point for personal motivation, no meta relevance, and half a point for charisma because he ruined it by the end, and a point for relevance to the story, 2.5. Overall film score, 7 out of 10. The Hulk. It's not even Mark Ruffalo. I mean, I understand that obviously they used Edward Norton and then it got a bit sticky, but, you know, still, it's a bit weird. It feels out of place stylistically with the rest of the MCU, but the visual direction is really good, and Norton plays the role really well, and Liv Tyler gets me every time, but hell, maybe the worst villain in the entire MCU. Banner is also the hero and the villain again here. This should have just been a film about Banner's journey alone, or maybe just not even existed. Watch for the meta? No. Villain rating, trash personal motivation, no relevance to the meta, literally the most annoying guy ever, and wasn't even needed in this or any Hulk film, even as a foil character. 0 out of 4. Pointless. Overall score, 5.8 out of 10, and I feel like I'm being really generous here. Iron Man 2. I love Stark, but boy has the villain become even more generic. Even with the whips guy added in. It's a pretty pointless film. Unrelated, but he looks like the bomber from Hunter x Hunter, who's a much better villain. Anyway, watch for the meta? Ish. It introduces War Machine and Black Widow as characters, but other than that, not really. Villain rating, I'm jealous of Stark trash. No way. No meta relevance, literally the most annoying guy ever, and really wasn't necessary here, but the whips guy saved the antagonism in this film, even if he was shoehorned in. Combine the two of them and the film gets a 1 out of 4. How nice am I? Overall film score, 5 out of 10. Saved purely on the strength of Tony Stark's character. Thor, good film. Thor has a great character arc. Loki's a great villain and the god of mischief, but his actions still feel really hollow to me. It's a reason, it's just not really a good one. His antics are so fun to watch though. Jane and Eric and Darcy, as always, are all great. Watch for the meta? Yep. Villain rating, half a point for personal motivation for Loki. He's very, very relevant to the meta. More than solid charisma and also very relevant to this story. Decent 3.5 out of 4. Overall, I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. Captain America, the First Avenger. Young Cap looks hella weird and he haunts my dreams and I can't get him out of my head. Jesus Christ, and the supporting cast is alright I guess, but Young Cap watches me when I sleep and the film sets up the Tesseract, but Young Cap probably likes belly buttons or something. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating, I'm the only super soldier. Man, that's a pass on me, dog. Surprisingly, he becomes relevant to the meta much later, and I do like the Red Skull's energy. He's evil vibes. And also definitely relevant to his own story. 3 out of 4. Overall film rating, 6.5 out of 10, because Young Cap probably ate the other 3.5 points or something. Cool. First Avengers. Hella fun. First film in the series that made me begin to wonder about how much repairs cost for like everything in the world. And also, Loki is a good main villain, although still hollow. R.I.P. Coulson. Watch for the meta? Duh. Villain rating, same as Thor mostly, although the aliens and from Thanos were cool, though they're more of an enemy than a full-on antagonist, so probably just the same as Thor, 3.5 out of 4. Overall film rating, 7.8 out of 10. Iron Man 3. Holy shit, this film is hot trash. Literally safe because Pepper's kinda hot. Everything else is pointless here. The only thing that's useful is that it shows how paranoid Tony became after the Avengers, which leads to his character arc in later films, but you also get that info in the later films. Just say RIP to Kobe as you throw this one in the bin. Watch for the meta? No. Villain rating. Stark rejected me, useless ass. No meta relevance, just an annoying little prick, and we didn't need him to know that Tony's paranoid now. 0 out of 4. Pointless. Overall film rating. 3 out of 10 because Pepper's kinda hot, like soup. Thor 2. Hot trash, the sequel. Except for now the Aether is an infinity stone, even though it's not a stone in the slightest. Doesn't save this film at all. Watch for the meta? No. What? Really? Just know that the Aether is an infinity stone and watch the after credits scene. Villain rating? Dark Elves. That should say enough by itself. Overall, 3 out of 10. Again, gets 3 points because Darcy, London, and that dude running around naked in Stonehenge. Captain America 2. Holy shit, yes, everything about this film. Hydra is an amazing villain at this point. Sam and Black Widow are awesome. Fury is always cool. One of the best films in the MCU comfortably. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? 7 years of insidious government motivation. Very meta relevant. All of the members were cool, including the leader dude, and definitely at the core of the story with all the Hydra stuff across the series. 4 out of 4. Overall, 9.2 out of 10. Only because no film can get a 10 out of 10 whilst it still has young Cap in it. He probably eats children. Next, Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm an alligator. I'm a bubba coming for you. Gotta get your love. Gotta get your love. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? Everyone's got good personal motivations. Ronan is meta relevant. Yondu has the charisma of the gods and all very relevant to their own film. 4 out of 4 because the villain is so difficult to clearly define, but it all still works so well. Overall, 8.7 out of 10. Avengers 2, an important one. Good villain, decent plot, doesn't end generic at all. Visual effects are crazy. Also, it introduces Wanda, who is pretty, crucial to this video, but yeah. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? Personal motivation is pretty solid, being an out-of-control robot, which is designed by Tony Stark, makes sense. Half a point for relevancy, considering everything Ultron did, being a catalyst for a lot of the story, and of course a vision. Half a charisma point because he's kind of annoying, but he's still 100% important to telling this story. 3 out of 4. Overall, 7 out of 10. Ant-Man. Aside from the initial shrinking scene and also the training montage, which I felt were cut way too quick, I really, really like this one. The villain is hella generic, but the whole thing is made up by the fact that it's so fun to watch. Scott is a great character and a great dad, and I love it. Fun. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? I want to be better than my boss, lame-o. Not relevant at all. He's an annoying geezer. Really not relevant to the meta at all, but he is needed to tell this story. 1 out of 4. Overall though, 8.2. So much fun. Edgar Wright was part of it. Fun. Civil War. Tony, sign the document, Cap. But my freedoms. Me? They raised some ethical questions, but really the whole thing was just stuff go boom and fight. Pretty anticlimactic, and somehow they still managed to slot a generic villain in there with Zemo, for sake. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? My family's dead. Get out of here. Gotta give him a meta point though, with him showing up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier later. Charisma? I think I'll actually give him this one. I do like him, but he was absolutely not needed for this story. He could have been written out of it without thinking twice. 2 out of 4. Overall, 6 out of 10. The thwack and power that they did do was pretty good. Also, Spider-Man and Black Panther. Cool. Doctor Strange is a but he's my favourite cunt. Also,
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
And the villain is semi-generic, but from being misinformed because of the good guys hiding secrets, that makes the story about knowledge and lack thereof, rather than just we need some revenge or something like that, as usual. That makes it a bit more interesting. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? Reluctantly, I gotta give a point to Caecilius, because I might do the same if I was misinformed and lied to in that way. No meta point at all. Half a point for charisma and a point for relevancy. 2.5 out of 4. Which feels like a lot because they still feel kind of generic overall, but them's the breaks. The system isn't perfect. I did try there. Overall, 7.8 out of 10. Very fun.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
Guardians of the Galaxy 2. It's fun because the Guardians are fun and young Groot is the best, but the whole thing's kind of pointless. Watch for the meta? Nah, not really. You don't need it. Villain rating? I want to take over the galaxy. Man, get out of here. No meta point for you, no charisma point, but he is needed for this film story. 1 out of 4. Overall, 5.5 out of 10. Spider-Man. Fuck, I really like this one. Very interesting for a Spider-Man film. Even if Peter is a bit of a he's still the best Peter. I think the Vulture works as a villain for me because he's just minding his business and Peter's trying to stop him. No plotting revenge or putting himself in the pits for the sake of it like some of these other villains. He just wants to be left alone to do his criminal business. In fact, he's definitely the bad guy in the film, but Peter's kind of the villain who shows up out of nowhere and starts antagonizing him. Also, that mid-film reveal of who he was as Liz's father was absolutely amazing. Watch for the meta? I hate to say it, but no. I really like this one as well, but you don't need to watch it because Spider-Man was revealed in Civil War. Villain rating? I don't even want to be a villain, I just want to do hood rat stuff with my friends. That absolutely gets a point from me. No meta point though. He definitely gets a charisma point, maybe the biggest one in the whole MCU. That scene in the car is one of my favourites in the entire series. And yep, definitely relevant for the film story. 3 out of 4. Overall, 8.1 out of 10. Thor Ragnarok. A tacked-on sister as the villain? I mean, with a small bit of story rejigging in the Guardians of the Galaxy, she could have just been Thanos searching for the ether and it would have been much better. He could have been the predicted Ragnarok or something. Every other character was really, really great in this though, and the inclusion of the Hulk was fantastic. It was a very fun watch as well. Watch for the meta? Yes. Villain rating? A non-foreshadowed sister who's the bringer of death? Miss me. She gets no meta point. She wasn't even the one who destroyed Asgard in the end. I found her pretty boring as well, and although it could be argued she was necessary because of the talk of Ragnarok, it really didn't have to be her, so that's no from me. 0 out of 4. Pointless. Okay, fine. Half a point for story relevance because I'm nice. 0.5 out of 4. But no more. Overall rating, 7.3. The villain lady brought the whole thing down in my opinion, but other than that, everything is class. Black Panther. Alright. I'm gonna have to take a slightly different approach on rating this film. Remember this? There's only one time in the current MCU that Marvel has really allowed this level of nuanced character, but it was under a very specific circumstance, and I'll get to that a bit later in this video. Well, we're here now, and with Killmonger. I'm also going to take this opportunity to shed light on Marvel Comics as a company, on a meta level, above the films, and talk about why many of their characters were created in the first place.
Hi heroes, this is Stan Lee coming at you. Want you to know, Marvel has always been and always will be a reflection of the world right outside our window.
You see, Marvel's universe has always been a conduit to talk about the real world, and they tie in real world elements religiously throughout their series, especially in the films. Black Widow and Captain America visit an Apple store in The Winter Soldier. There are references to Drake and Beyonce in Doctor Strange.
Try me, Beyonce. Come on, you've heard of her. She's a huge star, right?
Even the World Tree in Thor is explained as the multitude of planets seen within the Hubble telescope. The Marvel Universe is designed to be a parallel with ours as closely as possible, just with added superheroes. Many of Marvel's characters were created to explore real-world events happening at the time of their creation. Captain America was described as a consciously political creation, as Joe Simon and Jack Kirby were morally repulsed by the actions of Nazi Germany in the years leading up to the United States' involvement in World War II, and they felt that the United States going to war was inevitable. The opponents to the war were all quite well organised. We wanted to have our say too. Iron Man was created for Stan Lee to have an ability to explore the themes around the Cold War, particularly the role of technology in the fight against communism. There was a Spider-Man Barack Obama issue when he was elected, of which I still have a copy of the second edition of, and there was even a time when Ronald Reagan was revealed to be a literal snake in an issue of Captain America. Yeah. So, Marvel has never shied away from writing politically driven stories in their comics. In fact, they actively embrace them. But Black Panther stands out amongst the rest of the MCU films because it's the only one that's clearly and intentionally present-day political.
Alright, where am I?
Don't scare me like that, colonizer.
The next closest thing in the current MCU would probably be Hydra, and although many people would believe that national governments are actually controlled by a secret organisation, it's never something that's actually been proven, especially in relation to the Nazis and Hydra. Black Panther, on the other hand, is meant to serve as both a superhero film and a think piece on the modern Black American community simultaneously. Like, Killmonger is a great villain with understandable motivations, but would his character be as powerful if it didn't have the context of the race dynamics of current modern American society? I'm not so sure, but you can safely assume that those same dynamics and their history exist within the Marvel Universe in the same way that it does with ours. Diving a bit deeper into this, King T'Chaka, who's the Black Panther's father, killed Killmonger's father, which is pretty standard revenge motivation as far as Marvel villains go, but Killmonger doesn't just want revenge. He wants to be able to arm black people around the world so that they're able to stand their ground effectively against oppression. In fact, the reason his father was murdered was because he was trying to smuggle vibranium out of Wakanda for that very same reason, after living in America for some time and seeing the race dynamics for himself. His approach may have been a violent one, but it's also mentioned in the film that
it's what he was trained to do. His unit used to work with the CIA to destabilize foreign countries. They would always strike at transitions of power, like an election year or the death of a monarch. You get control of government, the military. Right.
Take that how you will. See, the character of Black Panther was created with the explicit intention of including more African and African American characters in Marvel Comics. Apparently the name Black Panther predates the creation of the Black Panther Party, and Stan Lee has said that the name was a sheer coincidence, but regardless of how it was formed, it's undeniable that in the modern film representation, the two were tied together inextricably, and it's kind of hard to talk about one without the other, so for some context, the Black Panther Party, originally called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, was formed in Oakland, where, incidentally, Killmonger's character is from.
Kid from Oakland running around believing in fairy tales.
As a neighborhood watch of sorts. Under California law at the time, people were allowed, legally, to draw their guns against the police, of which many of the members of the Black Panther Party did, as a deterrent to a noted history of police brutality within the area. Funnily enough, there's only one period of time in which the NRA, which stands for National Rifle Association for non-Americans, has supported stricter gun laws, ever. Despite all of the historic and modern instances of tragic gun violence in the United States, there's only one time, and that was once the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was formed. Again, take that how you will. In response to this neighborhood watch, FBI Director Edgar J. Hoover described them as, without question, the greatest threat to the internal security of the country, and advanced on the Black Panthers using a program he created called COINTEL Pro, with the explicit intention of undermining, infiltrating, and destroying the Black Panther Party. The program has been proven to be responsible for the assassination of notable Panther leader Frederick Hampton whilst he slept in his bed in Chicago, along with a slew of other accusations of espionage and murder. The government aside, there's an extensive number of incidents of unprovoked violence against black people dating all the way back to slavery, but I'm talking about instances such as the burning of Black Wall Street, which was explored in HBO's Watchmen, of which I highly recommend you watch, as well as the original Watchmen graphic novel. Also the murder of Martin Luther King and the countless lynchings in the American Deep South, just to name a very small portion. I won't go too in depth here because otherwise we'll be here all day, but regardless of whether you agree with the party's actions or not, from the list of incidents of violence and notable discrimination against black people documented throughout American history, it's not hard to understand why a black person would come to the conclusion that their race of people needs to be armed effectively to prevent further instances such as these from happening in the future. So, to compare the motivations of someone like Killmonger to that boy villain in the Incredible Hulk film is kind of unfair. He was written to be more than just a villain for a story, and that's what allowed his character to have such nuanced motivations and actions. So, because of that, I'm going to leave off the villain rating for this one. The film was pretty cool though. Also, armed rhinos are fucking awesome. Watch for the meta? No. Black Panther was introduced in Civil War, so you could skip this one and not really miss anything in the overarching story. You should watch it though, it's really good. Overall rating, 8.3 out of 10. Phew, okay, on to the next. Avengers Infinity War. It's literally Thanos. Everyone in this film is fucking great except Quill, that useless guy. All he had to do was not punch Thanos and the homie Iron Man will still be alive. It's fucking shit. But I do love his character, but also that guy. Watch for the meta? Obviously. Villain rating? Motivation is absolutely rock solid here with Thanos. In fact, it's probably the most well fleshed out villain in the whole MCU, as he should be. Obviously, he's relevant to the meta, his charisma is on 10,000%, and he's absolutely relevant to his own story. 4 out of 4. Film rating, 8.8 out of 10. Ant-Man and the Wasp. So there's 2 distinct, unlinked villains? That's kind of new. But both of them were pretty generic though. Surely they could have been combined into one, but neither of them really adds anything particularly notable to the story of trying to get to Hope's mum. Hell, this whole film could have been Ant-Man and the Wasp battling to get parts from the FBI, and trying to make it appear as though Scott was at home and then attempting to navigate the quantum realm. I don't think this film really needed anyone as an antagonist but the FBI, with Jimmy Woo, the homie. But anyway, aside from the shoehorning in of villains in this film, it was still a lot of fun and hilarious. I still liked it a good deal. Watch for the meta? No, except for the after credits scene, but as I said before, you should be watching all of these anyway, regardless of whether you watch the film or not. Villain rating? As there were 2 sets of villains, I'm going to combine them both here, with each scoring half a point in each section. Personal motivation, half a point to Ava, no point to the I'm just a bad guy who wants money boy guy. There's no relevance for either of them in the meta at all. Charisma, half a point to the stereotypical guy actually and his team. They were hilarious. Minus 100,000 points to Ava. She was beyond annoying. But okay, so obviously not 100,000 points, but you get what I mean. Relevance to their own story? It's a 0 on both fronts. They were opposition for the sake of it. All of which could have been done by S.H.I.E.L.D. and or the FBI. 1 out of 4. Overall though, 7.2 out of 10. It was really fun, to be fair. Captain Marvel. This was a great story. The whole cast was really great as well and played their roles really, really well. Danvers finding out she's working for the enemy and switching sides was really good stuff, and the whole thing was a lot of fun. Goose the Cat was my favourite character though. Watch for the meta? Yes, for Endgame, and also there's quite a few elements which appear to be going into Phase 4 that originated this film. Example being Monica Rambeau in Wandavision, remember that thing that started the video, is the daughter of Maria Rambeau and is also portrayed as a child in this film too. Plus the Skrulls have been popping up a lot since this film, so, you know, it's worth it. Villain rating. So, it's a little tough because of the story's dynamics, but I'm going to go ahead and say that the main villain of the story is the Kree, to which I would give half a point for motivation because they're being controlled by Ronan, who's an agent of Thanos, and I'd like to think that most of them are just fighting a war without really knowing why, like Carol was at first. Except for the guy who trained and deceived her, he seems pretty stock. He mostly gets a pass within the context of this film though. Relevance to the meta? Another half point. Led by Ronan's, that's something, but he's not really the antagonist here. Also, I feel as though the Kree will show up again at some point soon from the way that it looks like Phase 4 is heading. Charisma? Nah, it's a 0 here. The Kree are kind of stock and most are just there really. But relevance to their own story though, is a full point here. 2 out of 4. Overall score, 8 out of 10. It managed to make quite a few potentially generic elements not generic with good writing. Also, if Danvers is looking for a monkey husband, I'm here. Avengers Endgame. It's literally Endgame. Like, I have issues with time travel in fiction more often than not, and this film was no exception, but it was fun, well thought out, and a more than fitting end to the Infinity Saga. Of course, also, that final battle was amazing. Watch for the meta? To be honest with you, I don't really see why you would watch it. It's just kind of course you watch it for the meta. Villain rating, same as Infinity War, 4 out of 4. Overall score, 8.3 out of 10. The time travel knocked it down a few notches, but really good stuff. And finally, Spider-Man Far From Home. Mysterio's visuals are cool, but
Wow.
is he terrible as a villain? Ooh, Mr. Stark fired me and now I'm hurt about it and want to take his place. Ooh. What fucking absolute roadkill. Anyone who knows who Mysterio is was expecting him to be the bad guy from the literal jump, so even the twist of him turning out to be a bad guy was hot trash. But the introduction of the multiverse was awesome because it's fucking amazing in the comics, and the Spider-Verse film was also incredible, so I'm super looking forward to the third film. And also Peter getting his identity outed is very but anyway, Mysterio sucks. What a fucking waste of Jake Gyllenhaal. The film is proper funny though, and it's a lot of fun a lot of the time. All of the side cast was really good too, but man, he's not the worst villain in the series. That's reserved for the Abomination in The Incredible Hulk, but he does represent possibly the most missed potential all around, and that's possibly even more annoying than one who's just straight up shit. Relevance to the meta? Tough to say right now. It's definitely not needed to enjoy the Infinity Saga, but it does seem like it will be needed to understand the events of future films and series. Both of the after credit scenes are absolutely crucial, but you should be watching those anyway. I also feel like the Edith glasses are going to be pretty important in the future. I'd currently give this one a watch just in case. Villain rating? Jesus Christ, if this isn't the most eye-rolling villain motivation yet. A strong goose egg here. There's no meta relevance here at all. Jake Gyllenhaal had his moments because he's Jake Gyllenhaal, but this was by far the biggest waste of Jake Gyllenhaal's talents I've ever seen on film. Strong zero here too. But he does get a point for this particular story's relevance. Fuck, I hated this rendition of Mysterio. What a fucking piece of halloumi. 1 out of 4. Overall score, 6.2 out of 10. All of the elements aside from the villain were really good, but he was so badly written that I still have chest pains. So why did I go through the trouble of all of this? Well, looking at the overall scores, we can see that out of 23 films, half of them got a 2 or less, with 2 films scoring a 2.5 and 9 of them scoring above 3 in terms of the villain rating. Then of course we can count that Loki and Thanos got 2 films each where they're the main antagonist, and that really brings the number of solid villains down in Marvel films to 7 out of 21 in the first 3 phases. Don't get me wrong, these are absolutely rated on this arbitrary scale that I just created, and someone else may be able to dissect them better, but I don't think I did terribly here analysis wise. 2/3 of the Marvel villains are not up to scratch, because as a production company, they spend so much time sticking to the same formula and are very rarely willing to experiment with it. Which is a shame because, as I stated before, they could really have improved some of the films by focusing on what made each of the core protagonist characters great, without them needing to have a generic bad guy for a fight at the end, usually just for the sake of sticking to the very same formula. Too frequently, the villain or antagonist in Marvel films is used simply as a placeholder or a crutch to tie in other things in the film, often completely disregarding the fact that the villains themselves are a crucial part of telling a good story, and a great movie can only be considered so once all of its parts are taken into account. I mean, hey, it makes money, and there are other positive aspects to many of the films. Like, you'll see that the overall ratings for all of these films are much higher. I rated 15 of them 7 out of 10 or higher, because I enjoyed a lot of them, but the way that Marvel writes the villains to me is a persistent issue that could really elevate the quality of all of their films past this invisible standard that they appear to have set for themselves. With all of that rating in mind, I'd like to segue into something a little different, related to Wandavision. We'll call this section Salad's alternative ending to Wandavision if Disney were to wake up one day and say, "Fuck them kids, even though I'm not a television writer, I am just a monkey with fluffer brains." Okay, so imagine instead that Agatha Harkness wasn't a part of the series, and that she was just a regular villager. Aside from that though, everything that happened up until episode 7 was completely the same, except the conflict is over who can get to Wanda first, the current leader of S.W.O.R.D. or Monica, Jimmy and Darcy. Monica gets there first, and Wanda tries to dismiss her as she does before Agatha intervenes, but she manages to talk her down whilst holding back with her newly found superpowers, comic fans? Wink wink. But anyway, she manages to talk to her properly. Maybe Wanda's too strong and Monica gets captured by Wanda and keeps on trying to make her understand, but she's just not hearing it. Then Vision sees what's happening, walks into the room, and after seeing how far Wanda has gone, apologizes to her while near tears or something, and touches Wanda's head like he did to the other characters in the show, and he shows her what it felt like to be under her spell. She then breaks down, and that kicks her into the necessary flashback for the exposition of her past, and that's where all the Scarlet Witch stuff starts to be revealed. She's known that she's the Scarlet Witch for years because her parents had told her, or maybe her mum was a witch or something, but she hadn't awakened it properly because she was too young, or her mum said they should keep the whole thing a secret for now because of how powerful chaos magic is and how hard it would be to control. You can really put whatever you want here. Hell, she could even be a mutant like she is in the comics. But the important thing is that all that Wanda's character cared about was that she was with her family. Then of course the bomb goes off and she's with her brother. The Mind Stone thing happens as well later on in her life and her powers get fully awakened all the same. But in the present, again, all she cared about was being with her brother, and once he died, all she cared about was being with Vision and spending time with him in peace. Now that she's lost her brother and Vision, however, she's lost control of her powers again, like she did in Age of Ultron, but naturally, this time it's not vengeance driven and destructive, it's loneliness and grief driven, which is what creates the Dome Realm. When she wakes up again, she realises how much damage she's done and that she has to get rid of the realm because at her core she's a good person, she's just really hurting. So she walks out into the town and breaks the spell on the people and tries to apologise to them, but of course they're still terrified of her and she has to live with that. She goes to say goodbye to Vision and her strangely aging children and starts to dispel the realm, which is when the white remade Vision comes in with the sword trucks as they do in the original series. Wanda, having come to terms with herself because she realises that she has to be a force for good with her powers, she magics on the Scarlet Witch costume as she did in the original series, but now it's because she's pissed that they've resurrected Vision like this and are disrespecting his memory again in front of her. Vision and Wanda fight the White Vision and Colour Vision, White Vision. Boom. Colour Vision and Wanda fight the White Vision in the military before Colour Vision eventually talks down White Vision in the same way, showing Wanda that her memory of him is a force for good that also came from her, showing the dichotomy of her character, and also reminding Wanda that just because she created the world in this way doesn't mean that it's really Colour Vision. You know, the ship of Theseus and all that. This allows for a bit of action at the end if Disney wants it, and it still makes sense and sets up Vision, not necessarily either one, but the character, to be a part of the MCU in the future. She then says goodbye to her fake family, dispels the force field, and runs off into the wilderness like she did in the after credits scene, because she doesn't want to hurt anyone else. Finn, look at that. Things like her fake brother could even stay the same, and they could be part of the loss of control of the chaos magic that she had towards the end of the series anyway. Also, if you wanted to tie in the book that she got from Agatha, she could go and find it right after she left Westview, maybe in Sokovia because her mother knew about it, and she could take it to the wilderness like an after credits scene again or something. Like, I won't say my ending is perfect, but it does finish the series without ruining the themes and the lessons presented by the series, and also not diminishing Wanda's character by adding a stock Marvel villain on the end. Wanda's done a load wrong, but she also doesn't forgive herself, and she has to bear the full weight of what she's done without a villain tacked on. To me, that's a flawed character written well. With all of that said though, I still think that Wandavision really represents a step forward for Marvel. I think that Wandavision as a whole shows Marvel's understanding that the MCU needs to evolve somewhat to remain interesting and new for their fans, but at the same time, their unwillingness to truly deviate from the rigid formula that they've used for almost every superhero film that they've made since the first Iron Man came out, I think has cost them more than a few brownie points here. And that's really disappointing because as much as I could applaud Marvel and say that I think that they're on the right path, by falling back to their old ways at the final hour, they ended up making a show which had the potential to be an all-time classic into something that's now notably shy of the mark, like many of the films that came before it. I still think that the MCU has the potential to evolve in an awesome way, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of Phase 4. At the time of recording this, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is on episode 4, and that really looks like it's shaping up to have some real nuance in its themes and characters, so I hope that they don't drop the ball on that one. And also, Disney now has all the rights to all of the Fox-owned Marvel characters, but they're not quite at the evolution stage just yet. I do, however, have to give them points for trying something new with WandaVision, at first anyway, even if ultimately I'm disappointed overall. I will say though, defeating your enemy by philosophizing with them about a boat of all things makes for uninteresting visuals, but it's such a Chad move, I can't even be mad at it. Shout out Vision.